First, I'd like to start by welcoming everyone and thanking you for joining us for our webinar on supporting educators in reading across the content areas. We know that this is an unsettling and historic time and that all of you are very busy adapting to the changes that COVID has necessitated. And so we would start by saying that we hope that you're all safe and well, and we really appreciate you taking some time to join us here today. My name is Kirsten Miller. I'm a communications manager at REL Pacific, and I'll be your facilitator today. In just a minute, I'm going to introduce our presenters, but first I'd like to run through a couple of housekeeping issues and provide you with today's agenda and objectives, and a little bit of information about REL Pacific and the region that we serve. So to start with housekeeping, I think most of us are probably very familiar with Zoom at this point, definitely more than we may have been a few weeks ago. So we're going to mute everyone's line to avoid feedback, but we do strongly encourage you to use the chat box to ask questions or make observations throughout the webinar. And we have saved time at the end for a question and answer session. And we also have a couple of small group breakout sessions scheduled today throughout the webinar so we can talk amongst ourselves and get to know each other and discuss the topic a little bit. My colleague Betsy Calloway is our technical facilitator, so she'll be putting us into breakout groups, and if you run into any technical difficulties, please do just shoot her a note in the chat box and we will do our best to address those. So today's agenda, first, welcome, objectives, and overview. That's where we are now. We're going to have a brief discussion about COVID-19's impact and updates, and we do expect that some of our other conversations throughout our time together will focus on this kind of seismic shift that we're all facing. Then we'll move to an overview of reading across the content areas, best practices and strategies for educators, best practices for professional learning implementation, and then questions and answers. So again, we are here in the Welcome, Objectives, and Overview section. Thank you again for joining us. We're very happy to have you. And I've already introduced myself. I'm Kirsten Miller, and now it is my privilege to introduce our presenters today. I'm going to start with my colleague, Erin D'Amelio, who is a research associate at REL Pacific at McREL International. Erin provides research and consultation support for a variety of projects under the REL Pacific contract, specifically on literacy. Her experience prior to joining us at REL Pacific spans from conducting qualitative and quantitative research in literacy and international education issues. And Erin has also spent 2 years teaching English as a second language in Malaysia and France, probably also speaking those languages. And then Dr. Esmeralda Karimi is a Literacy District Educational Specialist with the Hawaii Department of Education for the Windward District, where she provides direct support to the complex area superintendent, principals, and teachers in designing curriculum, planning and delivering high-quality professional development, collecting and analyzing data, goal setting and coaching and interventions, so many amazing things. She is the recipient of the 2018 Corwin Literacy Leader Award, which was presented by the International Literacy Association and has been a board member for Hawaii State Council for the ILA, among many, many other accomplishments and honors. I could tell you, but we'd be here for a lot longer than an hour and a half. So we are very, very privileged to have Ez with us here today. So just a quick run through of our objectives here. We're going to provide an overview of reading across the content areas and supporting students in literacy skill development during their secondary education. We'll share some best practices and strategies for educators to use to support students, including English learner students and students with disabilities. And we'll learn about best practices for district level professional learning implementation so we can better prepare educators for this task. So I'm just about to turn this over to Erin and Ez, but briefly I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Regional Educational Laboratories if you don't know about us already. So REL Pacific is one of 10 regional educational laboratories, or RELs, that are funded by the Institute of Education Sciences. So you'll see on this slide that this map illustrates all 10 of those regions. In our region, we serve educators in the state of Hawaii, 3 U.S. territories, including American Samoa, Guam, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and 3 independent nations in free association with the U.S. That's the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia, including Koshrai, Pohnpei, Chuuk, and Yap, and the Republic of Palau. So as you can see from this map, the REL Pacific region is quite geographically vast. It spans an area greater than the entirety of the continental United States. And within these jurisdictions, we work with a number of research practice partnerships, and those focus on several distinct priority areas. College and career readiness and success, where we focus on aligning system expectations for K-12 graduates with entry into college and the workforce. Professional learning, it's all about collaborating with teachers and system leaders to create a professional learning environment in which teacher development is not only welcomed, but it works. So it's kind of that difference between buy-in and ownership. Language and literacy, that's what we're talking about today. And that subject area is all about developing language skills and literacy goals, particularly in the multilingual contexts that we see in the Pacific region. Social and emotional learning, how we can use social and emotional competencies and supports to improve student outcomes. And we will actually be having a number of projects related to social and emotional learning and COVID coming down the pike here pretty soon. We'll keep you apprised of those. And then data use and readiness just kind of underlies all of these areas. It's about increasing institutional data use for improving system and student outcomes. So now I'm going to just briefly stop sharing my screen so that Erin can pull hers up, and I'm going to hand this on over to Erin and Esmeralda. So you can go ahead and take this away, Erin.
Great, thank you so much, Kirsten. And as I pull up my screen, I just want to welcome everybody again, and really I appreciate your attending today, considering the situation. We hope you all are staying safe and healthy, and especially those East Coast attendees who might be thinking about dinner soon. We really appreciate your patience in listening to us today. So I just wanted to talk briefly about our language and literacy partnership work. We have a few projects related to language and literacy in which we help education leaders, state education agencies, and others identifying strategies to support their students in becoming proficient in literacy skills. And we have 3 projects currently in the Northern Mariana Islands, Coast State in the Federated States of Micronesia. And we actually have a few projects related to language and literacy that we are working on in the state of Hawaii, where Esmeralda and I are based. So we had originally planned this webinar unaware of the situation we would all find ourselves in right now. So we do want to spend just a brief amount of time talking about COVID-19 and the impact of education. So the RELs have been working together to develop a series of resources based on evidence to guide teaching, learning, and other considerations brought on by this pandemic. And there is currently a web page dedicated to those resources, which is being updated as soon as those resources become available. And I believe Kirsten will be dropping that link into the chat box soon or at the end of this webinar, and we'll certainly make that available to you as well once we wrap up today's discussion. So there are already a few FAQs about English learners and students with disabilities that are already on this webpage, so I encourage you to check them out to support some of the discussions we're having today in this webinar. And we also want to make sure that your concerns and needs are met by the different RELs. And so I also encourage you to take this opportunity to use the chat box to add any sort of concerns or specific needs that you or your district or your school are facing. And we'll try to address those. We'll certainly be sharing that with the work group. Some of the, we're trying to frame a lot of the strategies we share today with COVID-19 in mind, understanding that many, if not all of you, have transitioned to online learning. And most of these strategies can be adapted to online learning in terms of the resources that you share with your students and the way that you design your virtual classroom. Others may not necessarily be as appropriate, but we are presenting them with optimism, hoping that students and teachers across the world will be returning to their classrooms sooner rather than later. And we'd also like this webinar to have some more life beyond just today. So we're trying to frame the discussion to COVID, and but also wanting to recognize that this can be useful outside of the situation. Ez, do you have anything you want to add to that before I continue?
No, thank you.
Okay, great. So in our overview of reading across the content areas, I want to first acknowledge the importance of supporting literacy outside of the English language arts course. So we know that focusing on building literacy skills in the early grades is crucial to students' later success in school, but as students progress into the secondary grades, there is a need to ensure that they're also being supported in gaining the literacy skills that help them understand, analyze, and produce knowledge in all of their courses. The most recent NAEP scores for grades 8 and grade 12 students show that a small percentage of them are scoring at or above proficiency benchmarks across the different content areas. And currently these numbers are hovering between the low 20s to mid 30s. So we do understand that there is a need for more consistent reading instruction as students age. We know that a science report is going to look very different from a novel, even though they are covering the same subjects. So each discipline has a unique set of background knowledge, text structures, and different strategies necessary to help students analyze and produce and understand the different meanings in the text. So content area teachers should therefore be thinking about not only general literacy strategies, but also some discipline-specific strategies as an integral part of their instruction. No matter what text a student approaches, there are 3 elements working together to determine whether a student constructs meaning or how a student constructs meaning from it. These 3 elements are the reader's knowledge, including their experiences and the many ways in which they learn, the reader's use of strategies or ways of thinking and doing that reflect how experts in particular disciplines read and think, and finally, the reader's goals and dispositions, including engagement, motivation, metacognitive skills, and teachers' expectations. So these elements are particularly salient for students who are English learners or students with disabilities. The types of language supports students receive both inside and outside the classroom in both their first language and in English will greatly influence their success in content area classes. In addition to the strategies that Esmeralda will present on, there are other strategies that are specifically geared towards English learners. First, content area courses should integrate oral and written English language instruction into their content area teaching. This can be done using tools like graphic organizers, videos, and other visuals so that you can anchor instruction and help English learners make sense of the content. Courses should also focus on explicit domain-specific vocabulary instruction, as well as some general academic vocabulary instruction. So for example, if we think of science class, obviously you would want to teach words like photosynthesis, photosynthesis, but then also thinking about some general academic language like define, environment, or factor. And all of those general academic vocabulary words can span different disciplines. So you can support deeper learning by making connections between a new vocabulary word that is taught to words that students already know, and relating those new words to the students' experiences. Multiple exposures to new vocabulary words allows for greater retention of that word. So one way to do this is to provide different writing opportunities to extend student learning and understanding of the content material. Additionally, putting students together, regardless of their linguistic background, allows for a rich group discussion in which they share their insights and jointly construct knowledge. When we consider students with disabilities, we must ensure that schools and teachers understand their students' specific needs. And this requires collaboration with the special education team to develop and support targeted intervention. Of course, if you're a teacher working with your students in an online learning environment, you certainly want to be reaching out to your special education specialist or team to ensure that whatever supports you're providing in the classroom, the virtual classroom that is, are relevant and useful and specific to the students. So when possible, the teachers can use inclusive peer-mediated or small group formats. This strategy may not be possible right now, but later in a normal classroom environment, this is a very useful strategy. Students may also require that directions and other written materials are read out loud. It is also important to identify and address students' needs early with the essential, and address those needs with the essential learning outcomes in mind. Finally, ensuring that students who require it have extended time to complete assignments and have frequent breaks. Now, in a lot of the tools today in different web-based applications or browsers or devices have allow for different modifications. Videos with captioning can support students with different visual disabilities. And there are several browser extensions, I know specifically with Chrome, that can alter fonts, remove distractions, schedule break times, and also provide some click-free browsing. So there are some options for teachers who are delivering online learning services to students with disabilities. So I'd like to turn it to you all right now. We're going to start with our first breakout session. So after you introduce yourself as you get into your room, we'd like you to discuss the following 3 questions. What is content area reading and literacy? What is disciplinary literacy? And how is your school or district addressing these? And we'll bring you back after about 3 or so minutes.
So I wonder, Erin and Esmeralda, if you think we maybe could just ask people to share in the chat box, you know, some of their thoughts around those questions. What do you think of when you think of content area reading and literacy? What do you think of when you think of disciplinary literacy? And how is your school addressing this?
Okay. Yes. Well, first of all, let me say a big aloha. So aloha to all of you from Hawaii. My background here is yesterday at sunrise on Kailua Beach for Easter morning. So I hope that's not distracting to you. Hope that brings some smiles to your faces. Thank you for saying aloha in the chat room. I kind of wanted all of us to unmute and be like, aloha. But okay, so you know, the idea was to kind of activate your background knowledge on what you guys already know about content area literacy and disciplinary literacy. So let's see, anybody want to jump in and kind of say, if we unmute people, could they just jump in and kind of say some of their thoughts? Betsy, what do you think?
Absolutely. Anybody who'd like to unmute at this point can do so.
And I think also it looks like there's one answer in the chat box where Jenny Ricketts Duncan responded, content area literacy has to do with those skills and strategies to help students comprehend content literacy materials.
Yes. Should I share my screen during this part here so that we can see the, or?
Yeah, I think that'd be great if you could just pull that up.
The slide deck. Does anyone else want to share while we're kind of pulling this up right now?
We have another comment in the chat. Content area literacy is specific strategies and types of literacy specific to a content area.
Great. Okay. Bear with me because it's the first time I'm sharing my screen here. Is it working?
It looks like it's loading.
Oh, no. That, no, not send, share. No, sorry. I might have to have Erin maybe share.
You want to present.
Yeah, so I just wanted to share. Is that it?
There we go.
You guys can see that?
We can see that.
Okay. All right. Okay, present. Okay, Well, thank you so much for sharing that, because you guys are all correct. You're on the right track. There tends to be, I think we're very much familiar with content area literacy. It's something that we've been talking about for many years. So content area literacy really is sort of that literacy that we teach to help comprehension, right? So it's those comprehension skills that we want kids to use in every content area, so that they can make meaning of the learning that's happening in that content area. Now, disciplinary literacy, let's see, can I move this? Yes, no? Disciplinary literacy is a bit different. It's really tailored to that actual discipline. And as we know, that thinking critically, reading, writing, thinking, evaluating information is very different in each content area. So that's kind of the clear distinction, because I think what's happening now with the Common Core that's really has placed an emphasis on disciplinary literacy. We tend to kind of use the two words synonymously, but they're not to be used that way. So we sent out a packet to everybody. And this packet has a couple of the resources that I'm going to be sharing with you on the slide. If you want to take a moment and find the packet, I think it might be helpful as we go through.
And I did resend that packet just about an hour ago, so hopefully that's at the top of everyone's email list.
Okay. Okay. So, and you know, here's a perfect example, right? So here we know that like a literary critic, right, is very different. It's a different type of reading, writing, and thinking that a scientist would do, right? So if you look at this example here, you're going to see kind of the different ways that you would have to sort of read it. Oops, sorry. Read the text in order to create knowledge from it. You have to use, in science, we have to use a lot of the graphs and charts that are given to us to make information and make meaning out of the information that's being given. And there's obviously going to be different purposes and different ways to evaluate the text. So I just want to give you a moment to kind of take a look at that. I think something that people don't also think about when we think of disciplinary literacy is also the cultural differences between the disciplines, right? So the information, the way it's created, used, and evaluated, and even the language that's used in each discipline presents a different type of demand on the reader, right? So for example, nonfiction texts that we often see so in science has a lot of key entry points into it. You can make a lot of meaning in a nonfiction text or just, you know, than you can in a literary fiction text, right? So these are kind of some of the cultural differences to kind of think about as we're going. Now, I can't see the chat box anymore. So if there are any questions or if anybody has a comment or anything like that, you know, please interrupt me and let me know.
I think we're good. I'm monitoring the chat box, and I will definitely break in when we have a question about anything that you're discussing.
All right. So how do we start to kind of incorporate, like, what are some real instructional practices that we can do in our classroom to start infusing more disciplinary literacy practices? And the first one, you know, really is creating a foundation to build on. And that's the use of academic language in general in the classrooms. So for example, the teachers always modeling and demonstrating with his or her students some of these phrases, these verbal cues, these prompts to elaborate on language, like, you know, I noticed that you mentioned, you know, great thinking, keep going. I mean, these types of prompts and cues, along with the use of the academic language in the classroom, is really helpful to building this type of thinking, you know, happening in the classroom. And I know it seems so like, duh, but a lot of, I think we have to be actually more intentional in this if we're truly gonna want to build on it. So another way to build on this, once, you know, we start incorporating this type of language and prompts and elaboration in the classroom, you know, we have to be really intentional with the type of language we want them to use. And I always say, you know, academic language that has been emphasized by the Common Core is no one's first language. Unless, you know, you have professors as parents and you listen to NPR all day, this is not something that's going to come naturally to us or to our students. However, school is the place to build this language and practice. So one way in doing this is the use of academic language scripts. So that should be in your packet too. So for example, how many of you, is there a way to see like thumbs up or something like this? How many of you already use some of these academic language scripts in your classrooms already?
So another option would be to add that to the chat, if you want to just let us know in the chat if you already use those. So there's one yes, another yes. Plenty of yeses.
I like this question about multisensory teaching, especially for special needs and our ELs. It's also very important. We're going to see a video in just a minute here that's going to show some of that happening too. Okay, great. So we see a lot of people use this, and maybe for some, you know, I hope this resource here will give you lots of ideas on how we can use this more intentionally in the classrooms, because I think with Common Core, the only sort of academic language that was being used was the argumentative, right? I agree with you because, I disagree with you because. I mean, we've got to, like, you know, move it up a little bit to more of, you know, how do we ask for help? How do we request clarification? How do we probe higher thinking? You know, these are things that we can support our teachers into incorporating into into their lessons. And I often say with, you know, maybe even some of our lower L, it's okay to use certain language scripts over and over throughout the year, because that's how we build language. Okay, great. Okay, so let's take a look at what this actually looks like in the classroom. So everybody say a little prayer as I try to switch over to the video now. So what I want you guys to think about, we're going to go into a secondary classroom. This is a middle school classroom. And I want you to notice the teacher's use of the academic language scripts, as well as some of her physical cues to her students, and how she's modeling and demonstrating the use of this language in her classroom. So let's see if I can do this. Okay. Oops, here it is. Okay, everybody, can you see that? Can somebody let me know if they can see it or not?
We can see it.
Okay, so let's see if we can hear it too. Okay, let's start here. Can you hear it? Thumbs up.
We can. It's pretty faint on my machine, but we can hear it.
And our word-based words, we have our words that we generated when we were reading our texts, after we watched our video clips and we generated this. Okay, let's start it again here.
Okay, the volume is definitely much better, so I think we're good.
Today our focus really is that we are going to be using our academic language scripts
and our word bank words. So I just want to point them out to you again. They are going to be up on the screen for us to use. But again, we have our expressing an opinion, building on what others say, and our disagreeing scripts here. And our word bank words we have up against the wall right here. Our words that we generated when we were reading our texts, after we watched our video clips and we generated this list yesterday. This is the one we're going to be using. We want to make sure we're using these academic words. Okay, these are the words that we felt were super important when we were reading, that we identified. We want to make sure that these are being used, our vocabulary words, when we're speaking in our opinions when we're talking today. Okay? So, can I have an academic risk taker to read our philosophical issue for today? Fernando.
People should be able to choose which genetic traits their children will be given through the process of in vitro fertilization.
Perfect, thank you, Fernando. Okay, so I need everyone to open up in your interactive notebooks. We should be on, I believe, page 53, R and L. Now, we haven't really taken time to individually decide which position we really are in. We've been taking in a lot of information. We know that there are some people who feel one way and some people who feel the opposite way. But we haven't taken time to think about it individually for ourselves. So that's what we're going to do right now. I want you to look over all of your pros list, all of your cons list. I'm going to give you some time to right now think by yourself. Do you disagree or agree with the statement that people should be able to choose the genetic traits for their children through in vitro fertilization? So I'm going to give you a couple minutes. I just want you to think. Do you agree or disagree with that statement? And what evidence have you generated that supports your position? Okay, so I want you to think right now, individually. If you want to, you can interact with your pros and cons list and circle any keywords or underline some ideas that really help support that opinion for you, your stance that you're taking. So you can go ahead and interact if that's going to help you think better, looking at your pros and cons list. Okay, you guys, I'm going to call you back in 3, eyes up here, 2, focus, and 1. Okay, so before we get into our positions, I just want to have you I want to give you a chance to practice. So I want you to read your best piece of evidence to your partner. Again, we should be using our academic language, which should sound something like, I feel that people should be able to choose traits, or I don't believe that people should be able to choose traits because, and they give that one piece of evidence that you really feel really supports the opinion that you've decided to take. Okay? So, and
in my opinion, I think people should not do in vitro fertilization because only rich people are able to do this.
I agree with you, but I would like to add on that there could be pressure on the kid.
I think parents shouldn't be able to also, I have another idea that parents shouldn't be able to choose their kids' trait because it's against some people's beliefs about life.
I feel that people should get to choose their genetic traits because how someone raises their children is their business. If it isn't hurting anyone, why not do it now?
Okay, so I heard a lot of great things being shared. You guys are using a lot of evidence, a lot of academic language. I heard a lot of words being used in your definitions and your explanations of why you felt a certain way. So I really, really loved that. So right now we're going to move into our positions. So if you agree that people should be able to choose what genetic traits their children have, you're going to be in this aisle right here. If you, however, feel no, I don't believe that that's right, people should not be able to choose their genetic traits, then you guys are going to line up in this aisle right here. Okay? You need to take your notebooks with you. You need to tuck your chairs underneath. Make sure there's nothing on the floor for people to trip on. Go. You have 5 seconds. 5, 4.
Okay, I'm gonna try to get out of this part now. So let's see, how do I do that? Okay, so I've stopped screen sharing there. So just take a moment and think about what you saw, and maybe you guys can post it into the chat room. Like, what did you notice the teacher was doing with that academic language? How did her teaching and modeling support and her verbal cues? Okay. Great. Yeah. So the teacher modeled how it would sounded like. She constructed an argument. She's an outstanding teacher. She was encouraging. Absolutely. Academic language stems were helpful. Absolutely. And the thing about it is, when I go into classrooms and I see teachers doing this, I ask them, how do you do this? And they always give me the same answer. I plan for it. I think that we really take for granted that that having kids use this in the classroom with each other takes planning. And it needs to be built into our lessons. So they have the tools necessary to engage in the content. Yes, great. Okay. So reading across the content areas, there are a lot of strategies that we can use and focus on, but we're going to focus on 3 today. And those strategies are, they can happen at the beginning, during, and at the end of the lesson. So the first one we're going to talk about is, if we really want to build that academic language in all of our students, then we have to really teach those habits and skills of close and critical reading. And one way to do this is the use of pre-reflection questions. It's kind of like what we did with you guys today when we started. We activated your prior knowledge into tapping onto what you already know about content area literacy and disciplinary literacy. So let's start with that. So I always say that, by doing this, and those of you who were like me and went to teaching school like 30 years ago will know that this is what the anticipatory set, and we've kind of like let go of that. But we know that cognitive research tells us this is the glue that makes the learning stick. Because when you can attach new knowledge to past knowledge, this is where it happens, right? But it can get a little tricky in the content area classroom. So we want to show you how sometimes when we're activating prior knowledge, we can also support them by using other tools like a visual, perhaps, right? Or a realia, which, like a pen is an example of realia for our ELs. Different ways to kind of make this glue stick. So I'm going to put you through a little activity, okay? All right. So I want you to read this paragraph. And while you're reading, I want you to think to yourself, what is this starting to be about? All right, I know some of you have seen this before, but does anybody want to shout out what it's starting to be about? Maybe we can unmute everyone here. What do you think this is starting to be about?
Doing laundry.
Yes! What gave it away for you, Jay Hill?
Well, I already knew it.
Yes, okay. But for those of you who didn't know it, are there any words or actions or things that, your schema, your background knowledge of washing clothes, which we're all doing for some reason all day, every day now, even though we're at home? I don't know why I'm doing that. But anyways, was there anything that kind of made you guys think about washing clothes?
I think the never ending part of it. I mean, there is never an end to this in the foreseeable future.
Right. So we all bring background knowledge around that. And so if we go back to the last slide, sometimes sometimes just putting a title there, washing clothes, connects, that's the glue for some of our students, right? And making sense of the text. Because they're tapping onto what they already know about washing clothes. It's never ending. First you arrange it, right, into colors. You know, so these are little things, but they're powerful instructional practices. Also, using a picture, a visual in connection with the text is also very helpful in making sense of, and that's again, tapping into our background knowledge that we bring.
So there's actually a question in the chat from Nicole who said she had no idea, which leads her to think about students who have limited background knowledge, and how do we support them?
Exactly. So again, this is where using a picture is very helpful to trigger, I love how I have my earphones on, I'm not even plugged in, to trigger people's background knowledge, because although washing clothes may look different from culture to culture, I think most of us could figure out what that is. And then also maybe pre-teaching some of the vocabulary and phrases that connect to that act is also very helpful. I hope that kind of answers that question. Okay.
Would you be able to share your screen? Sorry, I can't see it personally.
Oh, I'm not sharing my screen.
It also looks like we have a question.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, it looks like we have a question. I saw a raised hand. Is it Rita? Rita?
Yes. And also I think when coaching teachers about these strategies, it's very important to limit our own outcomes of like jumping ahead, right? Because it depends on each student's context. And sometimes we're so geared in to going on to the next step that we're not so open to how this one text could be interpreted in different ways for different students with different cultural backgrounds or just different experiences.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Rita. Rita works with the University of Hawaii and she coaches teachers. So we appreciate you sharing your input. But you know, so that's just definitely something to kind of consider. An instructional practice, activating that prior knowledge at the start of a lesson is really helpful. Using titles, pictures, tapping into what they already know can start to help them to build that knowledge on the new learning. The next thing would be like during, right? So during the lesson, we can use questioning, but more specifically text-dependent questioning, which is what the Common Core is really asking for us to bring out. It's really, the emphasis really isn't anymore like, you know, that text to self, right? Text to world, text to text. It's really what is the author saying and what is the author trying to communicate. And so in your packet, you're going to see a lesson that has the levels of text-dependent questioning. But before I kind of bring that up, I want to show you sort of the progression. And this comes from Doug Fisher and Nancy Frey. And if you notice here, the levels of questioning always begins at level 1, which is sort of the general understanding and so main idea, supporting detail, right? That sounds very much like anchor standards 1, 2, and 3 of the ELA Common Core, right? So that's the what is the text saying. And then it's the vocabulary, text structure, and author's purpose. And so that's anchor standards 4, 5, and 6. And that's how does the text work, right? And then the final topping it, coming up to the top, which is sort of those intertextual connections, arguments, and that's, you know, building those connections to the text. I think when you look at this pyramid, one thing that we don't do well yet, and it's been almost 10 years, is kind of focusing on the middle of the pyramid. We're very good at main ideas, supporting details, and then we want to get them straight to the argument. But unless we are using some of those levels of questioning as we go throughout the lesson, we're not providing the scaffolds and support to get them to the product. So let me show you what I mean by that. So this is a great slide of what I just said, right? So level 1 is the literal level, right? What does the text say? Any questions in level 1, you should be able to look into the text to find the answer. Level 2 is how does the questions work? And how does the text work? And so that is the vocabulary that the author chooses to communicate the information. The way the author decides to structure the text is also very important in conveying meaning. And then interpreting what does the text mean, and those are those intertextual connections, right? Author's purpose, and all of those things. And finally, DOK 4, right? What does the text inspire you to do, right? That's their taking action. That's the test, that's the project, the debate, the paper, all of that. I don't know if there's questions. I can't see the chat room. Okay, so let's take a look at from their book. This is a wonderful resource, both elementary and secondary. This comes from their 6 through 12 book of text-dependent questions. And here's a science lesson, right? So let's take a look at the levels of questioning that you see. Oops, go in here. And what I want you to think about when you're looking at this is start to see how some level 1 questions might be what people would consider level 2 or level 3, right? So kind of take a look at that. So the question was, why is it set up like this, right? Okay, so we, when we're making meaning, right, from the text, we're starting sort of at that word level. So even like for our L's, right? We're starting at the word level, moving to the sentence, moving to like word, phrase, discourse, right? And then across the entire text. So that's what you see here on the left side where it's part to whole. And then also on the right side of the triangle, you see the anchor standards, the Common Core ELA anchor standards that follows that same sort of build from, the gist, the main idea and the detail, right? To then coming to a place where you're making your own argument, thought, summarization of it. So it's moving from small to big. I hope that answers that question. That's why it's designed that way. Okay, so coming back to these different level TDQs, can we open it up to everybody to maybe just share out what were some ahas that came to you around just looking at the different levels? I know Diane shared something really good in my group about author's purpose. I don't know if Diane, you want to share?
Sure. I was just saying that I just find with the teachers I work with, kind of like what you said, they're really good with the top 3 and kind of the bottom 3, but it's mainly like author purpose is kind of the tough one. There's not a lot of examples out there. They don't always understand what that means, of how to ask the question and what to look for answers for it as well. So I find that's kind of the 6 on RL 6 and RI 6 and 8 for RI 8.
Yes, I agree. And that's why I think this is a wonderful resource for, if you guys want to take a look at it, because it has video of teachers actually teaching and using, asking TDQs around those particular anchor standards. So I think I'd check it out. Anyone else have something they want to add?
We do have a question in the chat box. Do you see that?
I do. So yes, absolutely. This does correlate with the DOKs. And actually in the text, they have a matrix that shows how the TDQs correlate with the DOKs. Okay, I'm going to move on for the sake of time. So hopefully you found that interesting. Okay, the final strategy we're going to talk about here in supporting reading comprehension in the content areas is sort of that sociocultural piece of literacy. And that's the, allowing kids to use what they've read and learned and use it do something with it, right? So a lot of us use Socratic seminar or philosophical chairs. How many of you are familiar with that technique? Lots of hands going up. That's great. You know, I know I have 14 schools that I support. I know my teachers, I've been in my position for 12 years, and I know my teachers have been trained on this, but I don't see it often when I go going around. And it's because we're always worried about time. We don't have enough time for everything, right? So, but we have to build this in to our, you know, our units, our lessons, because this gives students a purpose to do the reading, to do, you know, to come up with their own text dependent questions, to have meaningful discussions with their peers. It's really, really important. We were gonna show a video on this, but we thought we might run out of time. I think one thing that's sort of new, if you look on the left-hand side, you see what this looks like in a whole class setting. But what is really more popular and somewhat doable is the triad style of Socratic seminar. And the reason why that can be beneficial is that everyone has to participate, right? When it's a small group, everyone gets a chance. And if we're modeling and demonstrating, using that academic language, using those language stems, using those text-dependent questions, when they come to this point, they have tools that they can use to facilitate these conversations. So definitely something to explore and to add into your routines. Okay, so that's kind of the end of that part here. Unless we have any questions, I was asked to talk a little bit about how do you support professional learning, especially around some of these practices in our schools. Erin, what would you like to do?
I think if there are, we can take just 1 minute to see if there are any specific questions to the reading strategies. And if there aren't, then we can just jump into this part.
Maybe we can write it in the chat room, because I actually figured out how to pull that up so I can see
Perfect.
it.
That's a great idea. If you have questions.
So exhausting, Zoom. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to jump into this next part. So although I'm a literacy specialist, I was a teacher for 16 years. And, you know, I always felt, and I still feel, that there needs to be a revolution in teacher professional learning, especially if we have all these demands and expectations on our kids being 21st century learners and having those 21st century competencies. Well, I think teachers need to learn in the same way, right? So I actually created a model called the Hawaii Lab Cohort, and it is a learning community, or we like to say a community of practice, that incorporates the 7 elements that Linda Darling Hammond and her team have identified for us of what makes effective professional development for teachers for the 21st century. So I'm just going to kind of go over what these 7 elements are. You have a very short article in your packet that kind of just gives you the gist of each element. And it's kind of give you some ideas of how you might expand on some of these elements, or maybe even build some of this into your own schools. And Erin said, if anybody's interested, we could do a webinar on just this if you wanted to. Okay, so let's talk about these 7 elements. So the first element, you know, that is important, I think, in teacher professional learning is that it's content focused. We tend to spread our PDs out, and it's just, you can't go deep. You know, it's always this sort of spray and pray with professional developments, right? We just throw it out there at them and see what sticks. But I think when we really allow teachers to kind of hone their craft and dig deep, we want to help them kind of learn an instructional strategy in a specific content. So for example, you could have a professional learning series on reading in the content areas, right? So that would be a specific content. The other one is active participation or active participant learning. And so in my model, the research shows that if you want active participations, groups should not be larger than 6 people, because past 6 people in a learning community, there becomes passive participation. So that's actually one of the criteria of my cohorts. It's 6 or less, baby. And it can't be less than like 4 either, because then it just gets flat. So small groups are really important. Also, teacher choice is really important. So when the model first came out, it had a lot of success. So principals were calling me, they're like, that's it, lab cohorts for everybody. We're gonna make lab cohorts and everyone's gonna join and this is what they're gonna do. And it doesn't work that way. Teachers need to choose to opt in, and they also need to co-construct what their cohort is going to be learning about and what the focus is going to be for that particular group, because it makes a big difference in the learning and in the energy that people bring to the learning in the long run. So those are key things. Then number 3 is there needs to be built-in time during the school day for these learning communities to meet. Yes, they might meet outside of the school day, but there needs to be time blocked in where my lab teachers, they get 4 observation days a year. We pay for their subs. The facilitator in the group goes and observes each other during the morning time on whatever instructional practice they're implementing. And then the afternoon time is their professional learning time, their data analysis time, their support time. And that happens during the school day. And that needs to be made to be important. We also it's super important to link research and literature into your professional learning communities. Why? Because sometimes you only know as much as the group knows. And sometimes what the group thinks they know is actually not the most effective practice. So I always say it's good to bring in a third party. So for example, if you wanted to build text-dependent questioning happening more at your school or in your grade level, you should invite Doug Fisher and Nancy Frey to come join you by maybe reading their text as an anchor text or their videos. You need that third party as you're building that shared language, shared understanding, right? Shared implementation of the practice. So that's really important to the effectiveness of your group. It needs to be ongoing. It can't be the one and done, the spray and pray. It needs to go out through the year. In fact, all of my cohorts are 1 year with 4 observational meetings and 10 interim meetings. So they stay connected. The energy keeps flowing throughout the year. And I know no one likes to hear this, but in Linda Darling-Hammond's meta-analysis, there is a need for expert and coaching. Now, teachers learn best from other teachers. So teachers in a community of practice can coach each other as they're building their knowledge together. And you can bring in a third party, a consultant, a literacy specialist, somebody who's an expert in the field to kind of help you grow your practices as well. That's really important. And lastly, ongoing feedback, actionable feedback. When I was a teacher, I want you to tell me what I can do tomorrow to better my lesson. And you need to give me specifics. It's not helpful to me to say that wasn't good, that was good. I want to hear what I can do better to up my game. So teachers would give each other actionable feedback, and they spoke the same language because they were reading the same literature and anchor text and getting the same coaching. And also there needs to be reflection time for the teacher. There needs to be time for teachers to look at student work and to reflect on their own practice to say, what is my impact of what I'm doing? How is that impacting my students' learning? So these are the 7 elements. Now, the lab incorporated all 7 elements. And one of the reasons why I designed it as a wheel, and I use this metaphor when I talk to principals, is in schools, we tend to, you know, we'll say like, we'll start with the wheel and we're like, well, we don't have time for that. So we're just going to take that piece out. And no, we don't really have time for coaching and support. We'll take that piece out. And now we're not going to read the literature. We don't have time for that. We're going to take that piece out. Okay, will the professional learning wheel keep running? Maybe, but it's going to run clunky until you take all the pieces out and it'll just stop. And that's what tends to happen. So, you know, we're happy to do a webinar if you want around that, or for people who are interested in setting something like this up, you know, with your grade levels, or just kind of enhancing what you already have, the PLCs that you already have going at your schools. But one place that people often ask me, where can I start? And I always say, start with an anchor text, you know, create a book club or something around an anchor text. And these 2 resources that I shared with you today are wonderful because they have video, it's teacher friendly, they're short chapters, you know, and, you know, they're around specific practices. So that is my presentation. So thank you everybody for coming today and listening and participating. You know, I'm such a people person, and this is killing me, this social distancing. So it's really invigorating for me to see all your faces. So thank you very much. All right.
Thank you all so much for your attendance today. We really do appreciate it.
And look for a follow-up in the next few days.
Yeah, everybody stay happy, stay safe.
Stay healthy.
Thank you, everybody.
Aloha.